Give me money, give me money, give me money, give me money, give me money.
Okay, so in a few previous videos, we talked about LGBTA rep and the tendency among viewers and the press to declare every single scrap of acknowledgement as revolutionary and to lavish creators in tug baths for what is essentially just half measures. And as much as I've criticized them in broad strokes, I confess it can be difficult for a lot of people to discern what I'm talking about when they're so steeped in that mire to begin with. So I took a few shows that were frequently lauded for being revolutionary, and we're going to grade their LGBTA rep in real time. Shut up, I'm not a loser, this is my job. Okay, I'm a little bit of a loser.
Some things never change.
16's LGBTA rep is the first and the only time in this video where the term revolutionary or important actually counts. There is only one LGBTA character in the entire show, that being Jean. Oh, and also her girlfriend later in the episode. Jean is a bit character who only appears in one episode, but in that episode she completely bucks most of the usual shitty trends. She explicitly says that she's gay and that she has a girlfriend who we later see her with. She's also the central focus of the B-plot of the episode alongside Nikki. We never see Jean again, but this episode did air in early 2010, which is what makes it so memorable. A common trend of articles that declare every single glance in the direction of a pride flag to be revolutionary is to always act like gay characters merely existing and saying that they're gay in a cartoon is something that would have been unheard of 10 years ago. But 10 years ago, a gay woman explicitly said she was into girls, said the word gay, said that she was seeing someone, and even had to turn another girl down. That sets the benchmark for later shows. 10 years ago, this was good enough. It is no longer good enough for shows produced today. Shows that cannot manage to reach the point that this one did are a step backwards, not forwards.
Girlfriend? You have no idea.
The Legend of Korra is really cut and dry. When the show came out, there was nothing. Literally nothing. There were a bunch of hetero love triangles for most of the series that never seemed to stick. I'm not sure why Breik had this weird idea that the show would be boring if Korra had a steady romantic partner. Lord knows where they got that idea, it's completely ridiculous. Either way, Mako got with Asami and then cheated on her with Korra, then got with Korra and cheated on her with Asami, then tried to go back when Korra lost her memory. It was a whole thing. There's a running theme with Mako's relationships in that he's just a massive piece of shit. So by the 4th season, Korra and Asami had seemingly started a close friendship before getting together at the very last second of the series. We talk a lot about last second gays, or I guess last second bi in this case, but Korra is probably the most egregious example of the trope, aside from maybe Voltron. The ending of Korra was so sudden and so abrupt that the creators had to go on and confirm that they were a couple on Twitter later on. And here's a pro tip for any novice writer. If you have to use Twitter to deliver this kind of information, you're fucking up. Even by the artificially dirt-low standards of modern gay rep, this was tepid at best. They just touch hands and look at each other. They don't even kiss or hug or show any actual affection toward each other whatsoever. Ultimately, Korra and Asami's relationship goes nowhere in the actual show. It doesn't even have a chance to properly start by the time the show ends. There's no actual language used, no affection, the whole thing is kept extremely ambiguous until a tie-in comic was made. I need to make this clear. Ambiguity is a death sentence for LGBTA rep. Writers might say it's better to be subtle and leave it up to interpretation, but in practice, all that ends up doing is getting gay couples gal-palled by the general public. Sure, hardcore fans might be chomping at the bit to declare their favorite ship as canon, and admittedly, only hardcore fans were watching at this point because The Legend of Korra was terrible, but it's important to remember that normalization is the entire point of representation. Straight couples in this show didn't have to hide behind veils of ambiguity, so why do we?
Who do you think coined the term Wolomancer?
Steven Universe is actually really cut and dry because one of my rules for gay rep is that if there are humans in your cast, then there must be human LGBTA characters in the main cast. And Steven Universe has 0. A big whopping 0. There is a single non-binary human character introduced in Future, and that is precisely it. So I may as well just write off the whole damn show as not worth talking about, but I have a point to make, so let's carry on. The only other noteworthy LGBTA rep in the show is Ruby and Sapphire, who themselves don't meet the criteria because they aren't main characters. Ruby and Sapphire have a very close romantic relationship that even culminates in them getting married, but the two of them are fused for the vast majority of the series. The reason this doesn't work is because fusions are their own characters with their own identities. Characters even refer to their own fusions by name in the show itself.
Last time we fused, Sugalite went berserk. And it's because of her that we can't even warp here anymore.
This time, being Garnet will be our decision.
And fusions themselves even refer to their base components as their own people.
Ruby and Sapphire were in turmoil over how you deceived me.
I came undone.
So ultimately, Ruby, Sapphire, and Garnet are 3 separate characters. Additionally, the show uses fusion as a catch-all metaphor for any kind of relationship, which continues to muddy the waters. One of Steven Universe's biggest failings is the sheer overabundance of metaphors being used to avoid exploring anything in detail. We can't explore Ruby and Sapphire's relationship because that would require them to unfuse, but they can't unfuse because fusion is 90% of the point of their relationship in the first place. And we can't explore Garnet as a character because for some reason Garnet stopped being a main character after Ruby and Sapphire were revealed. It's not like there weren't cool ideas to cover with this. I need to make this clear. Fusion as a metaphor for a relationship isn't necessarily a bad idea. It's just that Steven Universe didn't bother to explore it. For example, most fusions in the show are short one-off dalliances used to defeat an enemy, but Garnet is one of the few characters who are shown to be fused all the time. Fusion is characterized as an extremely personal and intimate bond, so exploring the trust it takes to remain fused all the time would have been an interesting idea. How do they handle being apart? Are they so accustomed to being fused that being unfused is comfortable for them? There's a whole wellspring of ideas in there to make this work, but ultimately none of them come to fruition. It's not that fusion is a bad idea, it, like so many other issues in Steven Universe, simply brushes up against the show's biggest failing. You might remember it, we talked about it a lot in the past. It's called the executive producer as a fucking moron. In most cases, every idea is either botched or mishandled or simply doesn't have its full potential realized. Gay couples are fusions. The one polycule is a fusion whose components we never get to meet. The show has 5 non-binary characters, but only one of them isn't a fusion, and only 2 of them are seen more than once. It's like someone went down the list of letters and thought, how could we fuck up every single one of these? Oh, right, one last thing. According to some sources, Steven's experience with the diamonds is supposed to be an allegory for trans people. No, we're not doing that. You know what's better than an allegory for trans people? It's crazy, but hear me out. Actual trans people. Okay, look, the pretentiousness is starting to make me angry, so let's just move on.
I must find my way through this.
I will reiterate my stance on She-Ra before we begin. As a whole, it's a B- show. It's okay. It's nothing groundbreaking, it's just fine. In terms of LGBTA rep, however, it is absolutely fucking rancid. She-Ra is perfectly fine for children to watch, in case you were wondering. But much like Rise of Skywalker and Steven Universe, you might have to sit them down and explain to them that someone being mean to you doesn't mean they secretly like you. Like, just head that off before it becomes a problem. She-Ra has many instances of gay rep, but they are largely shunted out of the frame for the vast majority of the show. They had a canon married couple in the first season, but never actually say the word wife or even show true affection beyond darling until the final season. Also, they're largely supporting characters and not actually part of the main cast, so once again, they don't count. Then there's Bo, who has 2 dads. And that's it. He just has 2 dads. The whole X-character has 2 dads thing is practically a tired cliche unto itself, and as such is barely worth a passing mention. Once again, these aren't main characters, and we barely see them, so they don't count. Then we have exactly 1 non-binary character for trans rep. But if you're following with shitty, pretentious art school brat trends, then you know what's coming. They're a non-human character, which automatically disqualifies them, but let's continue anyway. The trend on non-binary shapeshifters is itself a tired cliche that some non-binary people think is ideal, but many others do not. You guys remember how absolute fucking morons suggested that Tonks was LGBTA coded simply because she could shape change, hated her first name, and frequently wore purple hair? Yeah, that's not LGBTA coding. Looking really stupid is not actually LGBTA coding. Just because some LGBTA people look really stupid doesn't mean it's part of the culture. Looking really stupid is just something fun to do. Non-binary characters being non-human or shapeshifters isn't a bad thing in a vacuum, but it becomes a bad thing when it's all you get. I said this regarding Stivani and Elethin, and it bears repeating. Non-binary and ace people deserve actual, tangible, meaningful representation, and yet they so often have to settle for even scrappier scraps than the rest of us, and that's just not cool. As another example, when I first covered Hazbin Hotel, I came out against the notion that Vaggie is just the angry Latina stereotype on the basis that a lot of her anger was completely justified. Someone later said to me that being justified doesn't matter because when all you get is this character all the time, the nuances ultimately don't matter. And that circles back to what I've said about this trope and Bury Your Gays. Responding to complaints that a trope is done too often with trying to do it better is missing the point. I should have noticed it here like I do everywhere else, and I didn't, and that's me being a stupid bitch, which is why I'm bringing it up here. We good? And so we move on to Katradora, the only one in the main cast. Already out of the gate, we have 2 main problems. 1, the 2 do not get together until the very last episode. 2, they're ship teased right from episode 1 for 5 seasons, which is exactly 4 seasons too long. But the bigger issue is that Catra is unfailingly abusive to pretty much everybody, but especially her love interest, who she routinely tries to kill, maim, or otherwise degrade. Some people have tried to argue that it's not actually abusive, but their arguments are just the same hand-wavy arguments that Reylos have been using for just as long, and Catradora really is just gay Raylo. Gaylo. This comes back to the elephant in the room because it's in the first episode. She-Ra manufactures a situation to force enemies to lovers into the story, a trope that I should mention will never not be toxic or romanticizing abuse, especially with the way modern audiences tend to interpret the trope. With executions like Raylo and Catradora, this has always been about fetishized violence. But much like Raylo's, we're talking about people who are desperate to have their ship and their violence fetish guilt-free, so it's not worth focusing on longer than necessary. See, the real problem with Raylo wasn't the people shipping it. They were fucking gross, disgusting pieces of shit, but they were largely irrelevant. It was the creators who caved into those demands that were the problem. Likewise here, the real problem isn't Catradora's fanbase, it's the fact that the writers chose the most toxic yet easiest to avoid route for making this happen in the first place. They didn't have to have this garbage hanging over their head. They were already behaving like a couple right from the first episode. But once again, we have an executive producer who is an absolute slave to the enemies to lovers dynamic. She-Ra ultimately has zero meaningful, important LGBTA rep. And what makes it sad is that it almost did. If either Spinnerella and Netoessa or George and Lance had appeared more often, been more involved, were seen together more often, and used the explicit language more often, that would have been perfect. It would have blown every previous attempt to lazily skirt by gay and trans rep completely out of the water. So She-Ra gets a resounding F+ for gay rep. There's tiny inklings of improvement, like the fact that someone says, "I love you," but it's absolutely poisoned by all of these bad decisions, like the person they chose to say, "I love you."
We wish to present you with a token of our unity.
The Owl House is hard to think about because we're only one season in, and who knows how long it'll be or what will happen. But it's worth bringing up because of how much it speed runs through its romantic subplot. The usual tired, canned enemies to lovers storyline gets about 80% of the way through by the first half, and the two are friends with Amity's gay panic running through the entire sect. As much as I dislike the trend of people almost mindlessly going to a rival as a romantic partner, at the very least the Owl House gets through the boring part as quickly as possible. I don't much care for Luz and Amity as a couple, but I don't dislike them. I much prefer Luz and Willow, but a lot of my friends like Luz and Amity, so if they happen, I'll be happy for the sake of my friends getting something that makes them happy. It's the same as my feelings on Stormpilot. The way it's going now feels like there isn't much left for the two of them to do before someone has to confess, so the only way this could be dragged out is if they pull a Star versus the Forces of Evil and just have romantic false leads all over the place that we know won't go anywhere. If this turns out to be a will they won't they, then the Owl House gets a D. But if we get something closer to gay Kim and Ron circa season 4, then that could possibly be an A. As it stands, we'll have to wait and see. There just isn't enough, and already some people are calling it revolutionary, when aside from Amity being visibly crushing on Luz, it does nothing new or substantial.
Beware of me.
Okay, so originally I had a whole thing where if two shows were identical in how they handled LGBTA rep, then I'd only cover one and leave the other. So covering Korra meant I didn't need to cover like 6 other cartoons. But then my god, here comes Adventure Time with a steel chair. I won't talk too much about Adventure Time because for the most part it is just Korra again, with Marceline and Bubblegum having a turbulent relationship, but this time as exes before getting back together in the finale. And that pretty much was the end of it until the special Obsidian that follows a plotline featuring the two of them and heavily features their relationship in the foreground. And that's it. Like, that's all it needed to be. We've talked a lot about good enough in this video and in the past, and while Obsidian isn't great in that it's a streaming exclusive special made long after the fact, it does reach those bare minimum requirements and even surpasses them a little. It's not great, like, it's not excellent, it's not the most revolutionary thing ever, but here's the thing. I and many others were never asking for the greatest thing ever in the history of the universe in the first place. We were only ever asking for something substantial. It's good enough. You want to know how to make good LGBTA rep? That. Do that. More of that, please. But if you're following with shitty, pretentious art school brat trends, then you know what's coming. He's a not... Wow. I fucking wrote he in the script. My god, I am the worst.